The key to building wealth is to try and buy assets instead of liabilities. An asset is anything that has economic value while also having a future benefit. Assets include stocks, bonds, real estate that can be rented out, as well as items that will appreciate in value. Liabilities can be bluntly described as anything that loses you money. These include luxury purchases like TVs, pricey cars, and a whole host of other things. Some of these items are of course important, but to have a stable financial position, it is essential that your assets outweigh your liabilities. There are, however, certain unavoidable liabilities that most people invest in. One such example is a car. No matter how you look at it, a car is a liability as it takes money from you. It is almost certain to depreciate in value with time and costs a considerable amount for its operation and upkeep. This graph shows the depreciation of a typical car. After just 1 year, it's only worth 80% of its original value. After 4 years, it's halved in value. And after 13 years, a car is only worth 1/10 of its purchase value. The second of these unavoidable liabilities is the house in which you reside. As long as you are occupying a piece of real estate, it is not earning you money, needs upkeep and repairs, and is therefore a liability. When Warren Buffett, one of the greatest investors of all time, paid $31,000 for his house in Omaha, he named it Buffett's Folly, because in his mind, $31,000 was $1 million after compounding into the future. But what if we could turn a liability into an income-producing asset and use that income to pay for a liability? An example is buying a house to rent out. The house is now an asset as the tenant is paying you rent, and you can use that money to pay for a liability of your choice. In essence, somebody else could be paying for the lease of that shiny new car which you could drive around in. Buying property to rent out is not what I do, however. I have a busy day job and I don't have the time to be dealing with agents, tenants, high taxes, maintenance, or sorting out broken boilers in the middle of the night. Some people have had great success with property investing, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not for me at the moment. My strategy is to invest in the stock market. With shares, I can simply buy and forget. None of this is investment advice, of course, and I'm simply showing you my own journey. When I buy shares in a company, I own a share in the profits of that company in the form of a dividend. Those dividends could be used to buy liabilities if I wanted. However, I don't buy liabilities with the dividends. I simply use them to buy shares in other income-producing assets which then pay me more dividends, and I repeat the process month after month and year after year. If you enjoy this type of content, then please tap that like button as it really helps out the channel. Thanks. My journey started in 2009, investing spare money each month into the stock market. At the time, I was restricted to buying individual UK companies. ETFs were not mainstream. My very first target was to generate just enough money through passive income to afford a free cup of tea every day. Then when I achieved that milestone, I'd work towards a slightly bigger target. At the end of 2009, I had reached an average of £8 a month in dividends, and just 5 years later I was generating an average of £535 per month, which today would be enough to pay for the lease on a Tesla, all paid for by somebody else. The companies I invest in would be paying me cash out of their profits to own the car if I wanted. But I really don't have a need for such an expensive car, so I simply reinvest the money to watch it grow further, and I'm now generating well over £1,000 a month in dividends to do whatever I want with. But it all started with that simple target of generating enough for a free cup of tea every day. Many of the companies I invest in have what's called economic moats or barriers to entry. National Grid is an example of such a company which operates the electricity network in the UK. It is very difficult, if not impossible, for a competitor to suddenly challenge National Grid's dominance, allowing it to continue to make profits and pay dividends to their shareholders. Since I bought National Grid over a decade ago, the share price has almost doubled, and I've also been paid out over £6,000 in dividends, which I put straight back into the market to produce even more dividends. In the UK, the majority of listed companies pay out dividends to their shareholders twice a year, and some, such as BP and Unilever shown here, pay out 4 times a year. Not only do you receive these cash payments, which I find incredibly motivating, your capital should grow as well. When dividends are paid, I don't always put the money back into the companies which paid them. I could choose to have the dividends auto-reinvested, but I prefer to have control over where the money is going to go next. So instead, I tend to use the dividends to buy either new companies or add to existing ones in my portfolio, which I believe to be undervalued or experiencing a short-term shock to their share price. This ability to bargain hunt is one reason I like to hold individual stocks in addition to ETFs. Often when I invest, not only are the dividends used to buy more shares, but new money goes in as well. Dividends always go back in fairly rapidly, but the amount of new money varies. When I see headlines of market soaring and new records being broken, I'll put less new money in and save it. When there is a market correction or crash, I'll use that saved money and put more in than I usually do so I can take advantage of cheaper prices. Not only do most of my individual UK companies have economic moats, but they are spread across different sectors, such as banking, mining, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, consumer staples, utilities, insurance, aerospace, retail, oil and gas, and clean energy. And speaking of energy, if you are thinking of switching energy providers, then you might consider Octopus Energy, who I've used for 2 years. If you use the link in the video description, we can each get £50 of credit when you switch. By diversifying across many sectors, you spread your risk. Sometimes all the companies within a single sector could suffer a downturn, and you don't want your exposure to be too concentrated in any one area. In my own portfolio, I've been a bit exposed in oil stocks, and therefore I've given BP and Shell a bit of a trim recently to rebalance the portfolio and reduce risk. Research shows that those who rebalance their portfolio from time to time tend to make an extra 5% return, which may not seem a lot, but over the course of a lifetime could be huge. As well as sector diversification, my portfolio has geographical diversification too, as many of the companies I own are global giants earning much of their income from around the world. Shell, for example, earns only 5% of its revenue from the UK. The FTSE 100 is truly global, whereas the FTSE 250 tends to be more UK focused. In addition to generating dividends from individual companies, I've been buying a selection of exchange-traded funds to increase diversification even more. Exchange-traded funds or ETFs give you exposure to a whole range of companies or even entire indices in just one simple share. This one has the ticker code IUSA and gives you exposure to all those large American giants. Here are some of the largest holdings you would have. It's weighted by capitalization, so although you would have exposure to the whole S&P 500, 6% would be an Apple. I intend to buy plenty more of this ETF in the year ahead. Dividend yield is 1.4% spread across 4 payments a year. This next ETF is from Vanguard and has the code VHYL and gives me exposure to almost 1,800 high dividend stocks from around the world. This is another ETF which I plan to buy a lot more of. The dividend yield is 3.7% spread over 4 payments a year. For investing, I use a stocks and shares ISA with Barclays, which allows me to shelter from tax up to £20,000 of new money a year. Any dividends received are completely tax-free, and there is no capital gains to pay either if I sell my shares in the future. I've been investing with Barclays for over 14 years and I haven't had any issues, but they are not the cheapest. To see my review of other platforms offering investment ISAs, I'll leave the link up here. You may have heard the saying, it's time in the market, not timing the market, which is so important. So I make sure I have an emergency fund available, so hopefully I never have to sell my shares and can allow them to compound over time. For my emergency fund, I use premium bonds where your capital is protected and all winnings are completely tax-free. The maximum you can hold in premium bonds is currently £50,000 and the prize rate has just been increased again. For the March 2023 draw, the prize rate is increasing from 3.15% to 3.3%. Now here is an all-important recap. Buy assets, not liabilities, or at the very least let your assets pay for some of your liabilities. If investing in shares, invest in quality companies and hold for the long term. Reinvest any dividends to allow your wealth to compound over time. Make sure you have an emergency fund to avoid having to sell your shares. Use ETFs to diversify and reduce risk. and make good use of a tax-free shelter such as a stocks and shares ISA. Now, how did that simple cup of tea help me start my investing journey? Click here to find out.